Hello, Tony Burke here with the second screencast for Students on Construction Technology 1 to provide some general advice on revision and preparing for exams. And I should stress that although this screencast has been prepared specifically with students on CT1 in mind, the advice it contains could be applied to pretty much any exam, so it is very much general advice. I want to start by looking at the thorny issue of revision, which students always get fairly stressed about, quite understandably, because exams can be stressful. They do put you under considerable pressure. You've got a limited amount of time to carry out your revision, but the key thing is that you do actually revise thoroughly for your exams. I know that might sound blindingly obvious, but you'd be surprised at how many students take a very superficial approach to their revision. It's important that you allocate sufficient time to the revision process, that you work out how much time you've got available between now and the start of the exams, and that you actually start to plan your time. So block out chunks of time that you're able to use for revision. During that time then you can actually revise actively rather than just sitting and reading your notes. You should be making revision notes. So start off with perhaps quite sort of lengthy notes and condense them down so that you end up finally with just a set of key points or bullet points that you can use for last minute revision. What you should try and avoid doing is learning the handouts and the other sources that you've got simply by rote. In other words, learning them parrot fashion, so learning the words off by heart. It's much more important that you actually understand the content and you're able to apply it rather than just being able to regurgitate it. Some people say that they prefer to leave their revision to the very last minute so that they can sort of revise intensively, in other words do what's called cramming. My advice would be to avoid this. Most students who attempt it tend to get caught out and they find themselves very unprepared for the exam. It's far better to spend as much time as you possibly can on your revision so that you are adequately prepared. Think about the sort of equipment that you're going to need for all of your exams, not just for the construction technology exam, but think about the range of equipment that you might need, whether that's writing pens of different colours, pencils, coloured pens and pencils, an eraser, whether you'll need a ruler or a scale rule. You won't actually need that for technology. You won't actually need to measure anything, but you might need to perhaps draw some straight lines. You'll certainly need a scientific calculator for our exam, and it should be an actual calculator. You're not allowed to use a smartphone or a tablet device. The key message here though is that you have all this in advance. It never ceases to amaze us every year during the exam period how we get students turning up and right at the start of the exam they're sort of scratching around trying to borrow a pen off someone, asking if anyone's got a spare calculator. Don't be like that. Just make sure that you've got all the equipment that you need well in advance of the exam. So sort it out now. Don't leave it until the last minute is the advice that we're giving. in terms of the general arrangements that you need to be aware of in advance of the exam, it's really important, as I've said previously, that you know the date of the exam, the time of the exam, and of course the room where the exam will take place. Excuse me. Virtually every year at exam times we get students who turn up in the afternoon for an exam that has taken place in the morning. Unfortunately, if that happens, there's absolutely nothing we can do. That student will go down as a non-attendance at the exam and will receive a mark of 0 for the exam. So the simple advice is don't allow yourself to fall into that trap. Make sure that you check and double check the arrangements well in advance, and that you continue to check the arrangements right up until the day of the exam, just to make sure that there hasn't been any changes. You should familiarise yourself with the basic exam regulations. There are some important things that you need to know. If you are late for the exam, you will be allowed to enter the room up to 30 minutes after the start time, but beyond 30 minutes you will not be admitted to the room. So if you're late, at the very least make sure that you're no more than half an hour late, because beyond that you simply won't be admitted to the room at all. As I've said already, make sure you know the location of your exam. Where there's a room number that's been allocated, just make sure in advance that you know exactly where that room is. On the day of the exam itself, my advice would be to be as early as possible. If it takes you an hour normally to get into university, allow 2 hours, because the last thing you want is on the day of the exam you allow what you think is plenty of time to get into the university, and you find that there's trouble on the trains, or that there are cancellations or delays or whatever. So just make sure that you allow plenty of time. Make sure, obviously, as I've already said, that you've got all the necessary equipment. As soon as you arrive at the university, you should double check the arrangements, satisfy yourself that you know exactly where the room is that you've got to be in, and then prepare yourself. Different people approach this in different ways. Some people like to go to a quiet corner and just go over their notes themselves. Other people seem to be quite happy to get themselves wound up by talking with other students, but personally my approach would be to go and find a quiet corner and just sort of get yourself in the zone and ready for the exam. I would advise everyone to make sure they go to the toilet before going into the exam. Although you may leave the exam room to go to the toilet, you will normally be accompanied by one of the invigilators, but all you're doing is upsetting your rhythm in the exam itself. So you can avoid that by making sure that you don't actually need to go to the toilet. I would also suggest that you should be outside the room, ready to go into the room at least 10 minutes before the start of the exam. And the reason I say that is that invigilators will normally admit you to the room 5 or 10 minutes before the start. That means that you can get yourself comfortable at a table. Often you'll be allowed to fill in the information on the front of the exam answer booklet, so you can put your name and your registration number and so on the front. So why not take advantage of that and get in there in plenty of time so that you're ready and raring to go once the exam actually starts. So when you enter the exam room, then you will be required to leave all of your personal belongings either at the front or the back of the room as directed by the invigilator. You will not be allowed to have about your person anything which you don't require to actually do the exam itself. So you'll have to leave coats and bags and all other items elsewhere in the room. You will be expected to display your ID card on the desk in front of you. The reason for that is that more often than not, the invigilators will be people that you may not know, so they don't know who you are. They will have to go around and get you to sign in to indicate your attendance, but they will want to be assured that the person sitting in front of them is actually the person whose name is on the sheet. So you must display your ID card on the desk. As I said, you'll be allowed to fill out your details on the front of the exam booklet normally before the start of the exam, but in any case you must provide your personal details, your name and student registration number. Our exam booklets require you to enter your details and then fold down a sort of sticky front cover which conceals your name to enable the exam paper to be marked anonymously. So all that's visible on the top of your exam paper, your exam answer booklet rather, is your student registration number. You need to make sure that you read the instructions on the answer booklet and on the exam paper itself. When the exam starts, as said, you should make sure you understand the instructions, the rubric on the front of the paper, how many questions you're expected to answer, any specific instructions about the number of questions in each section. you should also go over the questions themselves and decide which ones you want to answer. Where you've got a choice, get yourself comfortable. There will normally be some that you feel confident about, others less so. So make those decisions up front, and perhaps sit and think about how you're going to allocate different periods of time to different answers depending on the marks available. And I spoke about that a little bit in the previous screencast, looking specifically at the CT1 exam revision. For written answers as opposed to multiple choice answers, it's very important that you understand exactly what's being asked, and to do that you should look for the directive words. What are you being asked to do? Is it to explain something, to describe something, to identify something? All of these things mean something different, so you need to make sure that you understand exactly what's being asked of you. Devote a little time to planning your answer. Don't just go headlong into the answer itself. It's worth spending a bit of time perhaps jotting down your initial ideas, either using a mind map or an outline of the answer, so that you can actually plan your answer up front. Don't worry about doing that in the answer booklet. You can just simply use as many pages as you like. You can always ask for additional booklets. If you don't want your plan to be considered as part of your answer, then you just put a line through it afterwards and it will be ignored by the examiner. Try to organise your answer though. Don't just do it as a sort of a random collection of information. If you're worried about actually making a start on your answer, then leave a bit of space. Don't allow yourself to get stuck on the introduction. You can always come back and add in a little bit of an introduction afterwards, but start writing. Actually get your ideas down on paper. A plea from the examiners who have to mark your papers: can you please try and write legibly? It's really frustrating to when you want to award marks to a student, but it's just impossible to do so because you simply cannot understand what the student has written. In some exams, not necessarily in construction, but it may be a part of of some aspects of the construction paper, particularly perhaps Collins section, it might be appropriate to provide sketches, and indeed you may well even be asked to specifically to provide sketches. Try and make them neat. They don't have to be sort of professional, but at least they should be legible and they should be well annotated. What do you do if things go wrong? Sometimes people just get stuck. Again, don't dwell on it for too long. Leave some space in your answer booklet and come back and tackle it afterwards. If you end up in a situation where you think your mind has just gone blank, then one piece of advice is to just use what's called a scribble strategy. Write some keywords down on a sheet of paper in the exam booklet and just write down everything that comes into your mind and look for things that will trigger ideas and information. If you do, if the worst comes to the worst and you get into a real panic, then it's probably worth sort of switching off. Sit back in your seat, try and calm yourself down, breathe deeply, switch off and sort of take 5 minutes, but don't allow yourself to get too wound up in the exam itself. As far as answering questions are concerned, you should avoid personal opinions unless you've been specifically asked to provide them. Don't try and be funny or facetious. It rarely works. You get no marks, as I said before, for simply repeating the question. Try to stick to your time allocation. If you're pressed for time, then just write your answer in outline, perhaps use some bullet points and then come back to it if you've got additional time at the end. Try to allow some time for reading over your answers at the end of the exam, and my advice would always be that you shouldn't leave the room early. You should actually sit and go over your answers and perhaps try and amend some of them and improve on them. Finally, why do students fail exams? Well, the most common reason for this is that they're simply not prepared for them, but other reasons include things like not answering the question and simply regurgitating the information that they've received in the handouts. So I hope you found that useful, not just for the construction technology exam, but for all of your exams. So all that remains really to say is the best of luck in both this exam and all of your other exams as well. Thank you.